There is a generalized consensus and assumption that these models are going to go multi-stratospheric in terms of their capability in the next few years. The limitation on that potential is us.
They are predicting in 2027, a switch is going to flip and suddenly we're going to have 1,000 times what we had now.
What does that mean for a ministry right now is I would be worried if you weren't trying to experiment with this stuff, or we don't want people to be left behind. But the adoption is going to go up by the broader society. I've always found it funny that we think the church isn't the place where innovation happens, because we're founded by the person that did the most innovative thing in the world.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Global Missional AI podcast, where faith meets technology and we explore how innovation can serve the kingdom of God. My name is Joshua Seal and I serve as the Director of Global Missional AI. Today we're diving into one of the most pressing questions facing ministry leaders, the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence and what it means for the church. Our guest today is James Poulter. JP brings a unique perspective on how AI is reshaping not just technology, but what it fundamentally means to do work and to serve in ministry. He's also a speaker at the Global Missional AI London event taking place on July 17th. We're going to have a one-day event with some incredible leaders and speakers, and we want to gather people from all across Europe and the Middle East in London for a day. I would love to have you there, and it's going to be a great conversation. You can go to missional.ai to find out more and to register. Before we begin, I just want to say a word from our partner, Glue. Glue is a technology platform for the faith ecosystem, shaping technology as a force for good to help people flourish and communities thrive. With more than 100,000 leaders on the Glue platform, they serve those who serve, bringing together comprehensive solutions, including values-aligned AI, ministry engagement, and distribution channels. Visit gloo.com to find out how their tools are amplifying impact. Let's jump into this fascinating and important conversation about the future of faith, work, and human flourishing in an AI-driven world.
Hi, I'm James Poulter. Most people know me as JP. I head up AI and innovation at House 337, a creative company based in London. And I spend some time working with nonprofits and ministries, including on the board of Christian Aid and advising the team here at Christian Vision as well. And I just get to spend a lot of time thinking about what does the future look like and how AI is going to change what it means to be a person wandering around on this planet.
I think of all of the people that we've talked to and had conversations with, there's an opportunity in this conversation to talk about where are things going. And I know that is inherently speculative.
Yeah.
Like you talk to any technologist, they're going to have a different answer. But the thing that has been sort of shocking me is that I don't see anyone who has any context of this issue that's looking forward in the next 5 years and saying, well, things are going to change incrementally. It'll be a little bit different in the way we do. Everyone who cares about this issue and is studying it is saying, what it fundamentally means to do work, to interact as a human is all about to change. So I would love to just talk about the things that you're looking into as far as where is this going? How do we respond? What's happening? So maybe you can give us a little bit of a state of the union. What's happening?
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, it's difficult to nail any prediction down like this because there are variables, right? If you go back 5 years, we would look at saying, 2020 was the dawn of the roaring 20s. Things were going to go, kind of up and to the right everywhere. And of course, none of us could have seen what was coming down the line. So there are outside things that come in and sometimes change the trajectory of the course of history. But that aside, I think if you listen to any of the teams that are working on data science or looking at kind of the AI engineering and research that's going on in the major labs right now, there is a generalized consensus and assumption that these models are going to go multi-stratospheric in terms of their capability in the next few years. And then that unlocks all sorts of potential. The limitation on that potential is us. as humans, whether or not our systems, whether or not our processes, and particularly whether or not our politics, at a macro, international level, can accommodate that level of change that quickly. And this tends to be the case in most technology revolutions. Before, in our pre-discussion, we're talking about how for many ministries and for organizations of all kinds, they were playing catch up with the web, or they were playing catch up with mobile or social, and more latterly things like voice technology and the metaverse. And the reason that we're playing catch up is it's not because the technology isn't good enough. It's because our ability to change is limited by entrenched behaviors, politics, administration, these types of things. The real question, though, with the AI change that's coming is if many of the functions that we use currently to limit our own productivity are augmented, or in some cases directly replaced by the AI themselves, then with it goes that limiting factor on our growth and our potential, because the AI begins to take care of those things. And so what I've been sharing here, and where I'm particularly fascinated over the next decade, is what does it mean for us as humans to rethink what parts of the work stack we do, particularly when it comes to the knowledge economy in particular. So people in professional services. So
describe that. What do you mean, like the knowledge economy?
Well, so, for many of us, spend most of our days where if we didn't have a computer, it'd be very hard to do our jobs.
Yeah, it's true.
And so if that is you, then you are probably a knowledge worker, right? And moving bits of information around, either from person to person or to organization, whether that's in not just software and technology, obviously, but think legal services, HR, education. These are knowledge economy jobs. They're certainly not working with our hands or building things or manufacturing in any way. And pretty much everything in that sector is on the table, because if the output of your daily work is either the movement of data or some kind of conversation in some form, then AI is going to be capable of doing that to a greater or lesser extent.
And that's even on the relational side, because, I mean, you go to like an average business, you walk in, you've got all these people sitting behind a computer, they're sending emails, they're doing some research, they're organizing some documents, creating some documents, sending more emails. So what I'm hearing is that all of those jobs are potentially about to change. What it means to do that type of work, relating with other humans, sending information, creating documents as a job, which is, I don't know if that's the majority of the workforce, like working desk jobs, but that is a pretty common experience.
Yeah. It's not necessarily that all of our jobs are just the manipulation of that data. Most of it is because it's an output of our thinking. And the thinking is the bit, I think, that isn't going anywhere. Or at least
praise God,
or isn't necessarily going to disappear, but it is going to change what it means to think. We've seen over the past decade, but particularly since 2020, that there has been this further and further fractionalization of jobs into individual roles and titles, and into more and more parts of that knowledge economy, more broadly speaking, has become more fragmented. And I think the reason we've done that is, one, because we're creating roles for people to do, and we like to have hierarchy and differentiation between what I do and what you do and what the person down the corridor in the next cubicle does from us. It helps with us organizing the way we work. It helps kind of give different job functions different roles and progression, but it also introduces all sorts of degrees of complexity, constantly asking that question of, is this my job to do, or is this your job to do?
Yeah, sure.
And then, when we have AIs that can take a lot of that complexity away, then you have to ask, well, what's then left for the humans to do? And I think the thing that's left for us to do is the squishy stuff. It's the stuff that is in physical matter, and that is because whilst AIs will get better at doing things like reading body language and interpreting emotion and empathy and some of these topics, they are still constrained by the context that they have, and the context has to be digital.
Yeah.
And we obviously live with a lot more context. We're processing a lot more context than just what's happening inside of a server every day. That's the stuff where we have to really help people at all levels of their careers mature into, which is empathy, leadership, strategy, critical thinking, and relational skills, and then equip them to be able to use these AIs to do the knowledge work, the manipulation of that discussion and those interactions to give the AI something to do.
So I think that kind of brings up two questions. The first one is, where is this going in the next couple of years? I'm also curious kind of to hear your take on the recent research with AI 2027 that just came out, and is that feasible? What does that mean for us? And then the second thing after that is, for those of us who work in the nonprofit space, who work for churches, as we're trying to figure out how should we respond to the way things are going to start aligning ourselves, what can we do now? But let's start with, where is it going in the next couple of years? I know this is speculation, but because you have a lot of experience in this space, I'm deeply curious to hear what you think.
Well, so where does it go kind of more broadly economically first? Assuming, again, no outside intervention, we can assume that the models will continue to get faster, smarter, better, and cheaper. But they will require more resources. And over time, that means a fight for those resources. Where do those come from? Make sure that we've got both chips, training, energy, compute, to make sure we have all of that stuff. But assuming all of those things can be overcome and the AIs will help themselves find and resource those things with fine-tuning the models to get them smarter and smaller in particular and more energy efficient, we can assume that problem will be overcome within the next year or two. It's kind of the thermodynamic issue of AI scaling. And so if that's true, then the research that you referenced, the AI 2027 paper that's been published by a number of great scholars, much more learned than I am, assume that we will get this multiplier effect, and that multiplier will continue to increase itself. And the multiplier is basically the ability for the AI to help train itself.
Yes.
So when you start having a multiplier that is beginning to be 5x, 10x, 100x better at training an AI than a human is, then what begins to happen is you constrict and constrain the amount of time it takes to reach that level of what we might call super intelligence. If you just let humans run at it, it's going to take a very long time. But if the AI can run millions of copies of itself, running variations, tests, and experiments concurrently, then it can begin to do the work that would have taken 100 years for us to do in the matter of 100 days.
So then the work that we're doing now that feels so fast in the AI space, because it's driven right now by human minds that are kind of tweaking the models and trying to direct them.
Yes.
That is effectively additive compared to a multiplicative effect that would happen when we actually hand AI over to AI and say, hey, make this really efficient, really fast, and begin training this yourself.
Yes, and from what the model studios have been willing to release, we know that they're already beginning to do some of that with, kind of AI's training, doing fine-tuning, with them doing red teaming, and also creation of synthetic data. So these things are helping constrain that time to compute and to the first token for us to see these models kind of get faster. So if we assume that begins to happen, then what happens out in the world? What happens in society? Well, it means that the models get faster. It means that they become more able to handle much bigger use cases, and these particularly will be in the geopolitical space. They'll be in the provision of energy.
The big questions.
The big things that we all debate with. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that these massive models are suddenly going to be the thing that you're talking to every day to get the job done that you are doing currently, because arguably the models that you already have in front of you are more than capable of doing that, and most people don't use them to the full extent that they could do. My general assumption is around about 90% of people use about 10% of the capability that they have in front of them when it comes to AI tools, in the same way that most people I know have access to Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, but there's still a lot of bad documents, terrible spreadsheets, and really bad presentations out there.
A lot of Comic Sans out there, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I went into the average office and said to the people who are sat in front of Excel, show me how to put together a great pivot table and also read the data, most of them wouldn't have a clue. Right, so this is always the case when it comes to the technology we have in front of us. We don't use as much of it as we might think. But let's begin to assume that some of that stuff gets taken care of. Then we do begin to unlock things that have been somewhat difficult to imagine for a long time. You just take the Metaverse, for example, which has been problematic to get the technology to be small enough.
How do you get enough software developers to actually create the spaces that will be engaging for people to go into in VR or in video games? It's so much work that it's just stalled out. But what you're saying is, if suddenly AI is creating these spaces that there have been barriers because humans don't have the time and energy to do that, a lot of these almost science fiction style dreams that we've had in the past, all of them get unlocked.
But well, precisely. I mean, just look at what's happening with image generation at the moment. You probably could have spent a long time learning to do graphic design in order to be able to create a character version of yourself inside a kind of, a packaged, little figurine model image. It's not that that wasn't possible before, but you would never have actually bothered to do it because the access to the technology wouldn't have been worth it. But when it's freely available to you, you'll do that level of experimentation because it has almost zero cost. And so if an AI at the moment is able to do that, then very soon we're at a point where an AI, you can just, we're already seeing this with some of the vibe coding that's being done with gaming. create me a Star Wars style flight simulator, like that one line prompt into a model like Claude 3.7 or Gemini 2.5 can produce a full 3D engine game in one prompt. So if that's the assumption, if I want to recreate a digital version of this room that I can explore around in my Meta Quest, it's 3 photographs and a model prompt away before that's possible. Now, right now, that's not available to us, but with the scaling of the compute, it suddenly becomes possible.
And so help us understand the scaling of the compute a little bit. In this research paper, again, which is speculative, but these are some really brilliant people with a background from OpenAI and some others, they are predicting that it's going to be almost linear this year, almost linear next year, but then in 2027, something like a switch is going to flip and suddenly we're going to have 1,000 times what we had now, something along the lines of that. So describe the scale of change of intelligence that they're predicting.
Well, they're assuming that first we begin to start getting AI agents that are not just reliable, but they're super reliable. Then super reliable to super capable. So it means that they can begin to start taking on the task for themselves. And that's when we begin to see the AIs begin to develop agents that train their own systems and get better, to the point where you've got engineers.
It's a snowball.
Yeah, a snowballing effect. The thing that they're also cautious to emphasize, and I would be as well, is that we have to take the long view of these things. So what we're seeing is this massive ramping spike. And if you only look at it in the very short window of the next 2 years, it looks like a massive upward trajectory. And of course it is. But it's all iterative. First, they're not assuming we go from a 1x or 1.5x style developer to 100x overnight. There will be moments where we will scale up through this process. And that's true for all of the types of agents that we'll see, whether that's coding agents, visual and imagery agents, writing agents, obviously, as we already have. So it's not just going to be, to your point, the flip switching is going to look like that. But in reality, it's a slow progression, but it just ends up very, very quick.
But in a year, the amount of technological change that is going to happen in a year, if you look at human history, most like switches that happen are over 100 years or over 200 years.
Yeah.
It's crazy that, at least based on this research, in potentially 1 year, maybe it'll be 3, maybe it'll be more, fundamentally, the way that we interact with technology, the opportunities for the way that we use data, and even kind of what living out a normal day as a human looks like, could all be flipped on its head.
Yeah. When our ancestors discovered fire, it wasn't like then the next day there was a blowtorch in the hand of everybody. No. And if there was, I don't think that many of us made it that long. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that would have been particularly good. So this is the challenge, is that how do you take a technology that is so potent and so powerful and begin to safely put it into the hands? And actually what these predictions suggest is that isn't what's going to happen. The availability of the technology will be here probably long before most people will have access to it to be able to use it. And I think there will be a lot of debate to be had, both in terms of the ethics of how much we allow out, how fast. But the real challenge is that also it will, the minute that is available, and this is played out in their scenario around spies and espionage, and there will be a desire around the world for people to be the first to have that technology. The real risk for us is making sure that fire into blowtorch scenario doesn't happen by accident, or doesn't happen because we have to do it just to compete with other people who would like to put a blowtorch in the hand of every member of society.
So the thing that really surprised me about the AI 2027 report is that it took into account like the arms race aspect of how there are all these ethical concerns, there's copyright concerns, but whenever you throw an arms race into anything, suddenly a lot of that stuff goes out the window. And so what they're looking at is they're saying, okay, the US is developing this technology at a great speed. China is developing this technology at a great speed. Suddenly, a lot of the barriers where we were saying, oh, once the copyright stuff is figured out, once this is figured out, when it comes to like global competition between superpowers, so if you go back to kind of the atomic arms race, all that stuff goes out the window. People suddenly, they don't care anymore. They just want to make sure that their adversaries don't end up with something way more powerful than what they have. So do you think that part of that acceleration will come because a lot of the concerns that are keeping it slowed down are going to go out the window because of that competition?
So I think yes and no. The yes is there will be a lot of push, and I think a lot of pressure from large governments and the model makers themselves and institutions to get the things out there faster because they don't want to be the ones that are seen to be falling behind. The thing that we've also seen, and you compare this perhaps to the car industry, is that when we then begin to reach speeds where we begin to see the danger, then there is a desire to retreat, right? We have cars today, your Formula One car can go down a straight 186 miles an hour, right, in one go. That is not what's happening on the highway outside here in Dallas, because, well, with some of the drivers, it probably is. But that's usually not what's happening. Why is that? Well, because we've done a number of things. First of all, we realized that car safety was dangerous because people were flying through the windshield when they hit the brakes. And so what did we do? Well, we regulated the car manufacturers to put seatbelts in the car, and that helped. But it didn't go far enough. And so then what we start doing? Well, we start putting traffic lights in and speed humps and, low control zones and low emission zones now more recently in congestion planning. And that helps, and that brings down the traffic incident rates. But you know what? The thing that's really helped over the past 30, 40 years in terms of making cars safer? Public information campaigns. Both here in the US and in the UK, we ran out national advertising telling people to put your seatbelt on. And they would grab the seatbelt and they would put it in, and we had to program that into people, because just because the safety controls are there does not mean people will use them. And as we've seen with social media in the past decade, that's absolutely true. And so I think the big thing that we will see is, yes, there will be this massive explosion of capability. There will probably be a couple of crises along the way, but generally speaking, what we've seen is it's the human nature to then go, this looks dangerous, we should make it safer. But we often have to kind of get to the point of danger before people start really taking this seriously. And what I'm trying to advocate for people is that we think about, what does the AI seatbelt campaign look like now? How do we get more individuals to take more accountability for their own data, for their own training, for their own model use, so that we don't end up in a position where we're having to do these mass campaigns to shut things down or try and find the kill switch.
So over the next few years, there's this massive ramping up that's happened. There probably, like you said, there'll be a massive acceleration, and we'll end up finding some of those safety things later once some problems show up and figure out what does that seatbelt look like. For those of us who are a part of churches, small Christian ministries, groups that are AI curious and really want to use technology for the kingdom of God, for the betterment of human flourishing, what can we do now to start aligning ourselves, knowing that this change is coming? How can we be wise in investing our time in learning about it without being, too bleeding edge?
Yeah, the question is, how fast does the bleeding edge begin to disappear into the rearview mirror?
Exactly.
So, if you think about the evolution of the smartphone, we've had smartphones broadly available now for nearly two decades. Yes, okay, the iPhone comes along, and that's probably the defining moment, but there were smartphones before it, and many years before it, actually, in cases. And so, the bleeding edge looks like completely paradigm shifting when something like ChatGPT comes along, and then there's a cautiousness of, well, should we be using this? We're only 2 years into having ChatGPT around, really, maybe 2.5. And the idea that you wouldn't just go and talk to it seems a relatively silly thing to think about. We've seen this in the past few weeks with the image generation models, particularly with the update to 4.5 as we're recording this, which has unlocked this amazing capability of people to do things, not just image generation, but graphic design and artist work. But then obviously we see an immediate need for pushback from some of the studios that clearly have had their IP licensed away. And so, that bleeding edge is not going to be around for very long. And the gaps between these bleeding edges are going to get closer and closer and closer together. And so, well, what does that mean for a ministry right now? Is that, I would be worried if you weren't trying to experiment with this stuff, because we don't want people to be left behind, because again, with the exception of some massive change or outside regulatory pressure, we can assume that the scaling is going to go up, the capability is going to go up, and the adoption is going to go up by the broader society. So we want people to be using these things, one, because it brings amazing benefits. I'm not an AI doomer by any stretch, and I think there's a huge, massive opportunity for us to take out a lot of the administrative work of ministry, a lot of the
grunt work.
What we would often call the grunt work. What we don't want to lose, though, is that the people that do the grunt work today, the reason that they also mature into becoming great leaders and very capable people in their own disciplines is because they had an economic reason to be in the organization long enough to learn what it meant to be a leader in the future. If we take away the grunt work and we also take away the economic reason to employ that person, then we also take away that opportunity for them to grow and mature. And so we have to then think about new ways to bring them in. So this will be a pressure and an opportunity. So often we see this a lot in the work that I do through our agency with call centers, for example. It is now possible to put an AI into a call center and replace away maybe half of the call center staff, because an agent can answer the phone, it can take the text, it can read read all of the documents that customer has ever given to that organization before.
Its feelings don't get hurt when someone's screaming at
Yeah,
it.
precisely. And then that opens up an opportunity and a problem. Do you get rid of the half of the people that no longer need to do that work, or do you retool and redeploy them somewhere else? The financials haven't changed, right? You've just saved half of your budget. So now you've got a bunch of profit. Okay, great. You can either choose to pay shareholders or you can give people a different job to do. And the same will be true of ministries, right? If your donation income remains flat, but suddenly I can get rid of a third of your staff because we've just augmented them with AI, what do you do with that third of people? Does it mean we do a third more work and we reach more people? I hope so.
I hope so, yeah.
But will those people be doing the same work? No, they
No.
won't, because that job that they were doing has gone away. And these are the ethical choices that are going to get presented to ministries, and you need to be planning for them, because you should work with the assumption, maybe it's not going to happen in 2 years, maybe it's not going to happen in 5, but 10 plus, no, I really think it probably is, that some of these roles are going to become economically unviable. And when the role becomes economically unviable, we're not saying the person is economically unviable. We're just saying that what that person needs to do is something else. And we need to be creative and invent what that something else is.
So it sounds like entry-level jobs, except obviously there's some that involve the squishy,
Yes.
the physical world where you're
Yeah.
bringing coffee to people, where you're cleaning up.
And I think particularly education, social care, kind of elder care in particular,
Much
these
of
are
that
huge
remains the same.
opportunities. Yeah, and also, pastoral ministries, worship, some of this stuff is not necessarily going to disappear.
But it sounds like a lot of entry-level jobs are going to take on a new form once some of that is happening with AI. And for ministries that are trying to figure out how they can respond now, what's like a first, obviously, like, trying out ChatGPT, trying out some of these for those having to create content using things like HeyGen and image generators and image to video, things like Kling and others are wise for their social media. Do you see any like low-hanging fruit of just like, I would recommend most ministries, most churches start doing this?
This may be a controversial opinion.
Please.
I'm not particularly upset about the social media manager jobs going away.
That's a hot take, bro.
I'm not upset about it.
Yeah.
It's a job that has existed for the smallest fraction of human history, and if it disappears in the next 6 months, then I think, let it go to the wind. Not a big problem. But the stuff that the church has done for the past 2 millennia, that's the stuff we want people spending their time doing. Discipleship, evangelism, teaching, meeting the needs of the poor, helping bring people into the kingdom. Great. Do they need to be doing that through editing TikTok and Reels? Probably not so much. Sorry, video editing team, you're doing a fantastic job. But and I certainly think that we've probably got enough podcasts, right? So like,
That's also a hot take on a podcast, JP.
on the one that we have just started. But what I mean by that, and I don't mean to be trite about it, but is that we've invented a lot of things for people to do in the past couple of years because the internet has given us opportunities for people to do things that never existed before. And many of those things are now going to get gobbled up by AI. Okay. And maybe that's just fine. Like, maybe that's okay. It's not a big deal. We've had farmers a lot longer than we've had video editors, right? And there's a lot of farming out there to be done, not just necessarily, kind of in the physical sense, but certainly in the mission field, right? And so I think that's the opportunity for ministries right now, is to be rethinking, okay, what are the core things that we're actually really here to do? To serve the poor, to meet the needs of those that, kind of are disadvantaged. And obviously to spread the gospel. And if that means that the AI can be helping do a lot of the functional things that we needed to do, but it still requires people to go out and connect with other people, then that's what we redeploy them into doing. And if not, then it's going out and becoming an entrepreneur and doing something inventive and creating economic opportunity for people. I think that those things aren't going anywhere, but just how we get those things done is going to change. So I think if you're a small ministry right now and you're thinking, okay, in the next 6 months I want to hire a social media editor, and I need to go and hire kind of someone to do my kind of CRM strategy, and I need to think about someone to do my major giving, fundraising, writing and stuff like that, just give that a pause for a thought for a moment and go, is that actually going to be a job that a human does in the next 6 to 12 months? And then if you're still sat there with budget to go and do things, knowing that the AI is going to do it for basically zero cost, then great. Like, put that money towards things that the human will be able to do, which is to meet the needs of people, to lead, to kind of craft relationship. Like, that's the stuff that the technology is not going to replace.
And so it's actually opening up this amazing window of opportunity for Christian ministries to however many X multiply their impact by saying, okay, we've been functioning based on this much income, this many donor dollars, but now we could potentially actually sort of double or even more our productive output without having, because a lot of the things that are slowing us down might actually end up getting automated away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where this sector, I think, has a tremendous opportunity, because we're not just doing it to balance a budget sheet. We're not doing it to necessarily beat in profits. This will be a completely different discussion in the commercial sector, where there will be a driving down of net margins. Things will kind of increase. There'll be opportunities for shareholders to do very well out of the economic efficiencies that AI will bring, because many companies will not redeploy people, and that's a societal challenge that I think the church is uniquely able to help meet. And maybe that does mean that many people who are about to lose jobs in the next decade from commercial sectors will find themselves in non-profit and work that is doing good in the world, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing either. So I think there's a big rebalancing, basically, is what we're going to have to contend with. And like I say, whether that's in 2 years, 5 or 10, we can kind of assume that it's coming in one form or another, and it's something that we wouldn't want to wait around and prepare for. I often like the analogy of the alien invasion, which is that if I came to you and said to you, there is an alien species that's sent us a definitive letter telling us that they're on their way. They're not any smarter than us, but they operate at 10,000 times the speed of the human brain. And they are coming, but we don't know if they're going to arrive in 5 months, 5 years, or 50. Would you wake up the next morning and prepare differently?
Absolutely.
Of course you would.
Yeah.
That's what's happening. That's what we're contending with. It's not a matter of if it's coming, it's just when. Wake up the next day and prepare as if it's going to happen.
To finish off this conversation, because Christianity is a stabilizing force in the world, there can be a tendency to be a little bit afraid of change by nature, and want to hold on to the way that things were. And I've experienced this most of my life, and being involved in Christian ministry and trying to advocate for embrace of technology. What is like a piece of hope that you have for the future and for how Christians will interact in an AI future that gives you excitement for what's coming in the next 3, 5, 10 years?
Yeah. I've always found it funny that we think the church isn't the place where innovation happens, because we're founded by the person that did the most innovative thing in the world. Come and change all of human history prior and start showing you new ways of doing things. Like Jesus is the model for what it means to be innovative. To go in and turn up the tables, to kind of walk up the hill and accept your fate, to get up on a cross. Like, these are the innovative things that he did in his time, and we're supposed to model after him. The idea that we shouldn't be the people that lead the way in this stuff, I think, is just completely antithetical to what it means to be a Christian. I think it's our responsibility to be creative in modeling after our Creator. So I am hopeful, because if the church truly believes that stuff, then we will be the people that do that, and we should be hopeful for it. I'm also hopeful because as you begin to think about all of these issues, and they are difficult to contend with, and there's a real danger of falling over into some nihilistic assumption that everything is going to go to the paperclip analogy, and we're all going to be sitting around just being widget producers, and we're just going to be the meat sacks that kind of sit by and make sure there's enough energy for the AIs to have a lovely time. You could fall into that. But I don't read any of that in my Bible. Like, I don't see that at the end of Revelation. I see a city on a hill shining that's being restored, and that's our job. And our job is to work with God in that restoration of his kingdom and bring it about on earth. And I think, he will use technology to do that. He is using technology to do that. He always has. And we just get this amazing opportunity, whether we are the first 9 billion people to walk this planet or the last. We get the opportunity to partner with him in that. So that's what I'm encouraged by, is there's an opportunity there that every one of us has.
Well, JP, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful interview.
Thanks, man.